Bonjour à tous, bienvenue à cette conférence.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this press conference to talk about the situation of COVID-19 in Quebec. The Premier of Quebec, Mr. François Legault, is together today with the Minister of Health and Social Services, Ms. Danielle McCann, as well as the National Director of Public Health of Quebec, Dr. Horatio Arruda. Mr. Premier. It's complicated when it's behind, but it's a beautiful mask. It's written ensemble, together. It was made by the Groupe Hockey from Ville d'Anjou, where the co-owner, Pierre-Marc Brûlé, is a resident of my riding in l'Assomption. Before talking to you about the pandemic, I still wish to get back to the protests that we saw yesterday in Quebec, but also pretty much everywhere in the world over the weekend. Of course, there are many people, and rightly so, who are shocked that once again there was a video of a white police officer killing a detained black man, that white police officers around do nothing. It is truly shocking. And I understand that many Quebecers and many people everywhere in the world are telling themselves, how can it be that in 2020 there are still people who question the equality of all human beings? It is shocking, and we can't just make pretty speeches. We have to act. And you know, in Quebec, we have what we call the Révolution Tranquille. And I think perhaps in Quebec we are due for a tranquil evolution. And I said it last week, we are going to be preparing and consulting. We're going to create a policy against racism. And it is very worrisome to see. And I heard and I listened to a lot of interviews very attentively, including ministers, members of parliament, Nadine Giraud, Christopher Skeet, Madame Carman, who were talking, who were victims of racism. And so it still exists, and nobody will deny it. If we wish to be able to put an end to racism in Quebec, I think that we have to first be clear. We're not putting Quebecers on trial here. The vast majority of Quebecers are not racist, but there is racism in Quebec. What has to be avoided is to get divided over one or more words and to avoid putting all Quebecers on trial. I think that all Quebecers agree to say that something has to be done, and we have to do it together. I am somebody who is pragmatic. So beyond pretty speeches, I want solutions. I want them to be pragmatic in many different sectors, so that once and for all, we fight against this very bad thing that is eating up our society. And I think that in Quebec, we've had good examples of success, of fights for equality. Let's think of our grandparents, of our French ancestors. We fought for the rights of Francophones in Quebec. And in Quebec, even though it's not fixed, we also fought for equality between men and women. And I believe that we can be proud to say that our society has progressed and that this value of equality is perhaps more profound in Quebec than in many other places in the world. So we do have the duty together to fight against racism in Quebec and to get this tranquil evolution. That's where we're at. It's no longer tolerable in Quebec. Now, I understand that there are people who perhaps were shocked, were worried to see the protest yesterday. It is a pandemic, COVID-19. However, I want to say I made the choice to not prohibit this protest and these protests in the plural. I understand very well that there are Quebecers who wish to protest, who are tired. And without encouraging it for health reasons, I think that it is also important to not forbid it. This being said, I come back to the pandemic. You already got the numbers, and they are very encouraging. Of course, we can't take anything for granted, and we hope that the numbers are going to continue just as good over the next few days. But when we look at the cases, when we look at the hospitalizations, when we look at the deaths, it truly is very encouraging, particularly because in the past few weeks, we deconfined a certain number of activities. So this allows us to go one step further. Not that I want to scoop those who will be making another presentation later this afternoon, but still, I think that we're now at the stage of opening family gatherings, friends, in small groups, inside. We've done it outside. We are now being able to do it inside. I also believe that we are at the stage with guidelines, the 2 meter, for example, of reopening restaurants. I'm not going to go into details here, but this afternoon there are people who have been working on that and who will be able to present things to you so that we can continue with this deconfinement, amongst others, of restaurants. And speaking of restaurants and businesses, you, as I did, heard a lot of business owners and restaurants say, I can't manage financially. The program that has been set up is not sufficiently generous. So I am happy that this morning the Minister for the Economy, Pierre Fitzgibbon, announced an improvement of the program to reimburse a part of the rent costs. And I am proud to say that with this adjustment, there is no province in Canada that will be more generous. In fact, by far, we will be the most generous province to be able to cover a part of commercial rents. And I think that it is important that our small businesses, that are restaurants in all regions of Quebec, be able to get through this the next few weeks and to be able to economically recover. Another word on Bill 61. You know that in Quebec, with confinement and the economic situation that everyone is aware of right now, there are many projects in the private sector that have been left aside or postponed. As we speak, there are construction workers, engineers, architects who are home because there's no work. And at the same time, the government of Quebec has all sorts of projects, schools, hospitals. I'm thinking of a few. I come from Saint-Anne-de-Bellevue, the Vaudreuil Hospital. Friday, I was in Sherbrooke, the Mother-Child Hospital in Sherbrooke. There's all sorts of school projects. There's all sorts of transportation projects, public transportation. And I think that everybody can agree that there's work to be done in order to improve our roads. So it's not a waste of money to start them earlier. These would need to get done eventually anyway. However, we have steps that are lengthy in Quebec between the time that we decide to work on infrastructure and the moment in which we truly start with the work. And that is why we have presented a list of projects, and these projects are all consensual. And I understand that certain people are thinking, amongst other things, well, we have to make sure that all the requirements, whether they be environmental or others, are respected. And it is our intention to say we are going to respect all environmental requirements. But can we do so in a shorter lapse of space, in collaboration with the opposition. I said it. The day that we presented Bill 61, there's no question of doing a gag. There's no question that the government will impose that bill. What I want is to improve it together with the three opposition parties for the good of all Quebecers and Quebec, because we are able, over the next few weeks, to put to work a part of Quebecers who are unemployed right now. And I'm convinced of that, to work all four parties together, to give ourselves parameters so that things go quickly, but that it respect all requirements. And I think that Quebecers wish to see political parties do that. They wish for us to work more together. That's what we've tried to do in the past 3 months, and I think that that is what we have to do with the economic recovery. We have to start projects that are necessary earlier, projects that we already have a consensus on with every single opposition party, but to do them a bit more quickly and to not waste months uselessly. So that is what I wanted to say to you today.
First, I want to say a few words on the issue of racism that's being discussed around the world. For me, we have Quebecers of different colors, different origins, but we're all human beings, and we're all equals, no exceptions. But we must face the reality and the problems lived by some of our fellow citizens, and we must act. Last week, I promised to implement a policy against racism. We'll go forward soon. We must continue to move towards equality as a society. Regarding the pandemic, our numbers continue to be encouraging. For the moment, the reopening is going well. Later this afternoon, we'll announce the gradual reopening of restaurants. People are also looking forward to rule allowing gatherings inside their homes. We'll have an announcement also on this subject this afternoon. So thank you.
Merci tout le monde. On va débuter la période de questions.
We will now start with the question period.
Je vous demanderai, s'il vous plaît, de vous limiter à une question par journaliste. On va débuter. Première question.
Bonjour, Hugo Duchesne du Journal de Montréal. À la lumière des...
In light of the latest results, would you say that the first wave is now behind us? And looking at what is going on, are you satisfied with the measures being taken by Quebecers, or do you fear slackening of following the measures and a second wave? Well, listen, we can't say that the wave is behind us because we cannot yet see all the deconfinement effects that have been brought. We remember that when we deconfine, it's 10 to 15 days later that we can truly see whether there were effects, the time that people transmit the disease, develop symptoms, and need care or hospitalization. However, we can be happy that the numbers are going down, but we know that viruses of this kind often have seasons. They're like other respiratory viruses. They're strong in the fall, in the winter and spring, and then it plummets in the summer. Perhaps this virus will behave in this manner, but I won't keep it from you that we are deconfining. We said so. We believe that it is important to do so. We believe that it is important for people to start a more normal life, but we still have to respect the guidelines. And I know that it seems to be a paradox. Like we see what happened yesterday, gathering. And gathering, people want to get together. If we forbid it, it often creates a lot more problems than if we just let it go. A lot of people were wearing masks, but they didn't respect that social distance. So that worries me. There was one recently. We'll see what the effects of that will have been. I'm not in a panic, though. It did happen outside. Most people were wearing masks, and there's even less transmission in the Montreal region. So the indications are better. But we cannot think that it's total freedom now. We are like on parole. We have to respect the conditions if we don't want to see transmission to come back. Are you able to observe whether there is retransmission if you do less than 10,000 tests per day where the objective was 14,000? Well, listen, we'll have people who have symptoms who will probably go and consult. That will be done. And also, the tests went up to 12,000. Now, the weekend with the summer, it's more difficult, but we'll increase them again. We'll have serological studies that are going to be starting in June. Some already started in Quebec and others, so we'll be able to re-note it because independently even of the tests as such, people will have symptoms and some will go to consult. Good news, the children are going well, whether it be at daycare or the schools. That is going to help us probably to even change our standards for the fall back to school. And I would say to be less strict towards children. And you've seen articles of certain pediatricians, and we're following the literature, and the news is good as far as coronavirus in children is concerned. Mr. Legault, if you will, you're allowing the reopening of restaurants, but not bars. And restaurants are going to be allowed to sell alcohol without consuming food. Isn't that killing bars? Well, listen, the bars, we hope to reopen them as well. Of course, there's a difference between a bar where everybody is standing and closer and restaurants where you will see it this afternoon. We will be limiting the number of people at each table and distances, so there is a difference. As far as the drink permits are concerned and the permits to sell alcohol, I think it's time that we be a little bit more flexible in Quebec. So it goes towards that of having greater flexibility to help, restaurants amongst other things. Because all bars are not necessarily very big. Some have much smaller spaces, and they could respect the same rules as in restaurants. Yes, but we know very well that the consumption of alcohol done at a bar is a different context than drinking alcohol during a meal in a restaurant. I understand very well, but we're also looking to what extent the environment is, for example, a place that is more favorable to not respecting social distancing. I'm not saying that bars won't reopen eventually, but I would say that for now, the work that has been done by public authorities, this is what we decided with the work that was done on such environments. Could you explain to us what explains that there's few tests? You talked about the weekend effect. Is it because there's less people who are ill, fewer mobilization, less symptoms? And for the serological tests, what scope do you want to give it to know who had it, who didn't have it? Is that going to be very broad or more targeted? It's going to be done through targeted sample that will be representative. That is the approach that will be used based on the recommendations of the different experts and in different regions and environments to check the circulation that took place. So sampling that will be done as such. And also we have to see that it's a mix of both. The tests are going down. Well, there's fewer people who are ill and fewer people who are going. So clinically we need less, and that section went down. But we are trying to maintain the community section, or the proactive, if you will, section. We are going to try, to kickstart it again. It's always more difficult over the weekend to have people who will go to clinics. We are reviewing all of Montreal very soon, the model of how we offer screening. The buses was an interesting way at one point. It seems to be less the case right now. Perhaps we should give access closer to individuals to different clinics. So we're going to be reevaluating these strategies to be able to increase the tests. It is true that we don't have the 20,000. That was the number that I had given. But we have to see that pretty much everywhere it's the same phenomenon. We're still testing relatively a lot in Quebec compared to others, but perhaps not enough to make me happy, not as much as I would like. So we're going to have to reevaluate all of that to see how we can do it. But there is a decrease, clinically speaking. If you look at the number of cases that we have right now, it's a lot. It's quite the decrease compared to others. But the need of documentation of public health, in my opinion, will have to increase it. Beyond the formula of a tranquil evolution, Évolution tranquille. What does that mean? And also, what is your definition of systemic racism? Because last week you said that there isn't any, even though there is racism, even though certain institutions have to improve. According to a lot of people, that is a definition of systemic racism. And today you're saying, well, let's not get confused with the words. What is your definition of systemic racism? Well, exactly, though. That is what I want to avoid, going on a debate of words and putting Quebecers on trial. Most Quebecers are not racist. Is there an unconscious system in Quebec? And what is the definition exactly that we have to give it to it? Experts don't agree, but we do agree on what can be seen. That is, the vast majority of Quebecers are not racists, but there is racism in Quebec, and it is urgent to fight this racism. And we're going to be announcing to you, I hope over the next few days, how we are going to face this mandate so that we can have results. What does tranquil evolution mean? Well, it means that Quebec has to evolve in the same way that we evolved so that the Francophones could have rights again, so that women could have rights. Well, it's time that we fight against racism, that there is an evolution on this front as well, that be done more quickly in Quebec.
Bonjour, Monsieur le Premier Ministre. Pour faire du pouce sur cette question-là,
to go along with that question, this morning Mr. Trudeau said that he approved that police officers wear body cams. There was a pilot project in Montreal, but there was no follow-up. What do you think about that possibility? Well, I think that it can't be excluded. Right now, I think nothing can be excluded. We have to find ways. We have to consult. We have to weigh things. You know, we have to look at the pros and cons, and we can't exclude anything. But we have to look at this attentively. About when you were announcing today the restaurants okay fine, you also said a very short sentence on internal gatherings. Are we going to end up with the 10-3-2, like, 10 people, 3 addresses, 2 meters inside as well? Well, we could think, and now I'm going to let those people explain in detail how that will work. But yes, in fact, that number, that 10, while respecting the 2 meters, that is what we're going toward, whether it be tables in restaurants and tables at home.
Bonjour, Monsieur Legault. Je suis un peu curieux de...
I'm a little curious to know concerning Bill 61. The two following things. You did mention in your opening speech that you're ready to discuss with the opposition for tweaking. So I must understand that Bill 61, you are ready to modify it in order to put parameters, because people have fears on the scope of the power, how long these will last, and also in that same file, your recovery plan, economic recovery, is entirely based on construction, whereas all sectors have been affected. What is your recovery plan for the rest of the economy? Well, first, it's not usual as a crisis what we're experiencing. Okay, but hold on a second. First, it is a small part of our economic recovery plan. Right now, Investissement Québec is analyzing hundreds, thousands of files to help businesses. We chose to go first with loans. Once we'll have analyzed these business plans, we are not excluding that a part of these loans may become direct help, so subsidies. Secondly, I said it earlier on, for commercial rents, which, after the labor costs, are the most important cost for businesses, we are improving. Remember, we had a plan where 50% of rental costs were covered by different governments, 25% by the tenant, and 25% by the owner. And that is where we had a problem. So now we're coming to say that in the 25% paid by the owner, the government of Quebec is going to pay 12.5%, so half. So we are doing a lot on the rental cost aspect. And as far as the larger companies are concerned, well, we're having discussions where nothing is excluded, not even taking shares. So the idea is to help all companies as much as possible to reopen as quickly as possible, and also to complete what was made by the federal government, because the federal government, also for SMEs, is giving loans of $40,000. So we had to work in complementarity to be able to help companies recover. But my objective is that Quebec will start the best with its companies, and that saves the most.
De la presse, une question pour Madame Mécan. On sait qu'il y a plusieurs CHSLD.
We know that many CHSLDs are unfortunately emptier than at the beginning of the crisis. Have admissions restarted, and can we allow ourselves to fill CHSLDs again? Thank you for your question. I believe that we have to analyze the situation very well. The first objective that we have is to truly stabilize, that is to continue and complete the training of the interveners in infection prevention, and to make it that everywhere, and particularly in the Montreal area, we have the necessary dedicated teams. And that is why the exercise that we're doing right now, that is of hiring 10,000 new orderlies, they will be in action on the 15th of September. That is fundamental. In the meantime, of course, there are people who have been hospitalized from CHSLDs, so they'll be brought back, but really within conditions that have been very well evaluated by public health. No risks to be taken. So as far as admissions are concerned, we're going to be waiting for the time being that the situation be stabilized further in CHSLDs.
Du journal Métro. Ce matin, il y avait un nouvel échéancier qui était publié sur les livres.
This morning, in the Green Books, what was published on police officers, I'd like to hear you about racial profiling, which is one of the things that is going to be talked about. How are you going to change the way that police forces intervene in Quebec? And do you agree that there is a fight to be held as far as racial profiling is concerned? Well, I've already said it. Yes, I believe that it is a small minority, but I think that there is racial profiling, and this is a subject that we wish to tackle and where we want to find solutions so that it no longer take place anywhere in any police force in Quebec. What has to be changed in the culture of police forces? Well, I can't draw conclusions right away of the work that's being done right now. So there is work that is being done, and there will be recommendations, and we're going to set them up quickly. English questions now?
Première question, CBC.
Yeah, Anthony Nerestan from CBC. I want to go back to the big protests over the weekend. A lot of people who attended say they took it as a big slap in the face that their premier denies the existence of systemic racism, specifically the term systemic racism in Quebec. They took it as a big offense, a slap in the face, and they say that you don't get it. That it's not a system of racism, of intentional racism, that it's a collection of biases, the préjugés, that lead to a lot of disadvantages for a lot of communities. What do you say to the people who say that you don't get it, that you're not making an effort to get it, and that your plan to fight racism in Quebec is useless unless you make an effort to see it from their perspective?
I don't understand why people are trying to stick on one word. I think what is important is to say and to all agree that there is some racism in Quebec, and we don't want that anymore. So that's the key. And we have to be careful about letting understand that maybe a majority of Quebecers have a problem. And that's why I said we had a problem with the place of Francophones in Quebec. We had a problem with the place of women in Quebec. We've improved the situation. We have to do the same for racism and not fight against one word, but fight against racism.
They're saying that by not using the word systemic, that you're downplaying the problem. You're making it less than what it is by saying them, because you keep insisting the majority of Quebecers are not racist, which is not what people that were protesting are saying. They're saying that racism and discrimination is common, not necessarily saying the majority. And they're saying by you running away from the word systemic, you're downplaying the problem. And what do you say to them?
But what I say to them is that, is there a system of racism in Quebec? Some experts, that's their definition of systemic. I understand that some other have another definition, but why should we fight against or for a word instead of fighting against racism?
Thank you.
We'll take the next question.
Good afternoon, Amanda Klein with CTV. Mr. Legault, do you think that funding that typically is allocated to police go towards other groups like mental health intervention, for example?
Sorry, can you repeat your question?
So funding that typically would go to police forces in Quebec, do you think some of that money should be reallocated and given to different initiatives like mental health intervention, just as an example? So basically, should some money that typically goes to police force be reallocated, given to other groups?
I think we have to invest more in mental health, that's for sure. But I don't see why we have to decrease the financing of the police people.
Just because the term defunding the police has, many people are asking for this, the fact that some money be reallocated, be given to different groups, but you don't think that should be?
I think we have to work on both hands. We have to work to make sure that there's less racism in the police, but also work to have more mental health help for all people.
We'll take the next question. Yeah, you already have two questions. We're running out of time.
That was just
one quick
very
one.
quickly, just for Dr. Arruda, the open letter to physicians about having children not have to wear PPE or respect physical distancing, is that something that you're looking into? Or?
Yes, we are working on this. We are also looking at the literature as they are looking at. So it's clear that we have already changed the camp ratios for this summer, coming back to what was before. And we will do the work also for, I would say, daycare centers and schools.
Next question.
Melina Jubilaro, City News Montreal. Can you explain to us why families now can get together inside, and then why we're announcing restaurants the gradual reopening today and not bars?
In fact, you must understand that the consumption of alcohol and eating is something different from going only to the bar for socialization, which is different. So it's why we are going in a step, trying to deconfinate slowly, going to what is more essential, not telling that a good drink is something not essential, but it's different from eating together and socializing, and this is a different type of social intimacy compared to bars.
And just the family gatherings, please.
This is going to be said this afternoon, so I don't want to scoop the thing, but I think you could understand that this is some logical. We don't want to make, I would say, inequalities of health bigger, because if you don't have the money to go to a restaurant and you cannot socialize with your own family, having a good meal at home is something that we want to not create this discrepancy between the rich people who can go to the restaurants or the ones who can manage it, comparing to others who cannot.
We'll go with Mathieu Lapierre and Montréal Gazette.
Good afternoon. Dr. Arruda, can you provide us with an update on the situation in Montreal?
Okay. In fact, and I discussed this morning with the Director of Public Health on duty today, things are going, I would say, in a good situation. I will say that there is less cases every day. There is less people dying. So, and there is no active, I would say, a flare-up of transmission locally. It doesn't mean that there is no transmission. There's going to be always cases. I just want to make people understand that the virus didn't disappear. There are still people getting the virus, perhaps with no much symptoms or getting others infected, but the situation is under control. But I think it's less fragile than it was, I can say, but at the same time, I don't want to be too happy to be disappointed in a week or two. So it's why I will tell people, even if you see a lot of crowding persons yesterday, it's not the time to be crowding like this every day, and please keep on recommendations of public health.
Merci beaucoup.
Merci tout le monde.
Thank you, everyone.
Bonne semaine.
Have a good week.